supply chain when the rules just change overnight? That's a massive, frankly uncomfortable question, isn't it? But it's exactly the question posed by the intelligence bulletin we're breaking down today. You see, we're looking at a fundamental, literal overnight shift in how global trade operates. So if you're managing logistics, procurement, or corporate strategy, listen up, because the baseline you've relied on for decades, it's actively being rewritten as we speak.
Welcome to our explainer on what analysts are now officially dubbing the era of strategic survivability. Today, we're synthesizing the May 14, 2026 Supply Chain Intelligence Bulletin. It's dense, it's absolutely crucial, and we're going to look at how compounding global crises, everything from geopolitical gridlocks to surging tariffs, are forcing a complete paradigm shift in global trade.
Our anchor today is this May 14th bulletin from Pinalytics. Honestly, it's a total masterclass in data-led strategy. It cuts right through the noise to show us exactly what the numbers are saying about the health and the future of our global supply networks. This isn't about guessing, you know? This is about looking at the hard data to figure out where the choke points actually are, and more importantly, how we can navigate them.
To keep things moving, here's our roadmap for the explainer. 1. The new survival mandate. 2. The Hormuz crisis and freight. 3. Surging global trade volatility. 4. Tariffs and the Beijing summit. And 5. Inflation and industry choke points. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, the new survival mandate. For the last 30 years, global trade has been absolutely hyper-focused on optimization. But guys, that baseline is officially broken. We've entered the era of strategic survivability. What does that mean? Well, it means shifting away from asking, okay, what is the absolute cheapest and fastest route to get this from point A to point B? Instead, leadership has to ask, which corridor can I actually depend on? It's a total shift from cost optimization to pure resilience amidst all these stacking global crises. If you're still optimizing just for a stable baseline, you're planning for a world that literally no longer exists.
Moving to Section 2, the Hormuz crisis and freight. Nowhere is the destruction of that old baseline more obvious than the US-Iran war. We are in week 11 and Hormuz is functionally closed to commercial traffic. Just think about the physical scale of this bottleneck for a second. Over 1,550 stranded vessels, 22,500 trapped mariners. Traffic through Hormuz is down to just 5% of its pre-war average. Before the conflict, a full 20% of the world's oil moved through this exact corridor. Today, it's effectively a closed route, and that is forcing a massive rewrite of how goods move between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. So the really crucial point here is the timeline. Saudi Aramco CEO Amin Nasser put it bluntly. If disruption continues, oil recovery will likely extend into 2027. Yeah, 2027. This isn't a temporary hiccup. Major carriers like Maersk, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd aren't just hitting pause. They have permanently restructured their primary east-west routes all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. They're actually having to build entirely new feeder services using smaller vessels just to keep these supply chains breathing. And of course, that physical blockade ripples right into some immediate financial fallout on the ocean freight side. The Drewry World Container Index is up 3%. Spot rates from Shanghai to New York jumped 7% in a single week. Carriers are aggressively pushing peak season surcharges up to $2,000 per 40-foot equivalent unit. Plus, they're using blank sailings, which, let's be real, is just a polite industry term for intentionally canceling a ship to artificially constrain capacity and keep those higher prices intact. And with transit times extending because of that Cape routing, we're seeing a massive spike in sea-air hybrid cargo conversions just so companies can hit their delivery windows.
All right, Section 3, surging global trade volatility.
Diving into the Bulletin's quick stats dashboard, the GEP's Supply Chain Volatility Index hit 1.64 in April. That is a 3.5-year high. We're talking a 3x jump in a single month. And the Asia Index specifically surged to an astonishing 3.79, mostly driven by those transportation spikes and direct oil dependence on the Middle East. It's wild to think about, but global transportation costs have hit an all-time record high since tracking began back in 2005.
Naturally, because of all this volatility, companies are stockpiling. But we've really got to separate fear-driven purchasing from demand signal purchasing. Right now, purchasing activity is at its strongest point in over 4 years, but the data indicates this is heavily front-loaded buying driven by fear of shortages. Think of it like the corporate equivalent of pandemic toilet paper hoarding, rather than genuine consumer demand growth. And this creates a huge inventory distortion risk. If the Hormuz situation eases up unexpectedly later this year, firms sitting on all that inflated, expensive inventory are gonna face a brutal markdown cycle.
Which brings us to Section 4, Tariffs and the Beijing Summit.
Now, compounding all that physical volatility is the legal and diplomatic uncertainty around the high-stakes summit in Beijing between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. The U.S. delegation includes top tech and agriculture CEOs, which definitely signals a heavily commercial negotiation. Based on the intelligence bulletin, a limited agriculture deal, think soybeans and corn, is the most probable outcome. However, if you're a leader hoping for a total reversal supply chain decoupling, don't hold your breath. Structural AI chip export restrictions will almost certainly stay in place, which is heavily complicated by China's weapons supply to Iran. The focus of this summit is very much about managed competition, not global reintegration.
And outside of Beijing, trade policy is broadly cited as the absolute #1 uncertainty factor for procurement leaders today. This timeline maps out exactly why. Back on April 20th, U.S. Customs and Border Protection opened a refund portal for over $166 billion in contested tariffs. That's a massive cash recovery opportunity. But looking ahead, you've got a July 4th deadline imposed on the EU regarding trade agreements, which threatens significant tariffs on European autos. And looming ominously right after that, on September 29th, is the real threat of implementing Section 232 tariffs, which would put 100% duties on branded pharmaceuticals.
Let's wrap up our breakdown with Section 5, inflation and industry choke points.
All of these macro pressures, the blockades, the hoarding, the tariffs, they all funnel down and physically squeeze specific industries, and ultimately the wallet of the U.S. consumer. Let's look at the April 2026 U.S. Consumer Price Index. Headline CPI is sitting at 3.8%, while core CPI is contained at 2.8%. That gap tells a very clear story. Energy is the primary driver here. The national average for a gallon of gas has hit $4.50. That's up 44% year over year. That energy inflation basically acts exactly like a tax on the entire supply chain, and it's passing straight through to consumers.
In the real-world squeeze, it's severe. After adjusting for inflation, real wages actually fell 0.3%. That's the first negative reading we've seen in 3 years. Inflation is actively eating up wage gains. We are already seeing companies like Whirlpool report nearly 10% revenue drops, citing what they call a recession-level industry decline as consumers just entirely cut back on appliances and durables.
Beyond the consumer level, specific industries are hitting some major choke points. Over in pharma, the EU Critical Medicines Act is pushing mandatory buffer stocks to reduce reliance on Asian ingredients, and that is massively accelerating a complete redesign of biopharma logistics. In tech, the AI boom is driving some really intense memory chip shortages. But you know what the most fascinating takeaway here is? A really surprising fact about this AI boom is that the absolute scarcest resource right now isn't actually the chips themselves, and it isn't the talent. It's actual physical data center grid capacity. I mean, you can build all the chips you want, but you still need the power grid to plug them into, right? TSMC is even attempting to buffer some of these risks with their US expansion.
So how do we actually operationalize all this data? The Bulletin Sector Predictions Dashboard serves as your immediate playbook. This transitions us from just identifying the problems to outlining some really forward-looking strategic action across energy, freight, and procurement.
Distilling that dashboard down, here are the concrete executive actions supply chain leaders need to take right now. Number 1, model your 2027 scenarios assuming oil pushes past $120 a barrel. Number 2, stop blanket stockpiling out of fear. Instead, build tiered safety stock based strictly on SKU criticality. Number 3, lock in your Trans-Pacific contracts right now before those carrier rate hikes fully take hold. And 4, if you are in healthcare, you need to aggressively model the landed cost impact of those September 29th 100% pharma tariffs today.
Which brings us right back to our opening question. What happens to your supply chain when the rules change overnight? Well, the data proves the rules have already changed. The leaders who are going to dominate the rest of this decade are the ones who abandon the illusion of fragile efficiency and instead invest relentlessly in strategic survivability. So I'll leave you with this. If your primary corridor vanished tomorrow morning, would your business survive the afternoon?